بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا تأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome once again to our third session. Alhamdulillah, in this blessed month of Ramadan, which is technically a live Q&A. So inshallah, I'm gonna give everybody more opportunities to ask questions. Inshallah, you have so in between those questions, then I will try to go through something of the presentation which we've been working with for the last two sessions. So if you have a question, please do feel free to post that question, and then inshallah we can take it. So I'll give you a couple of moments, inshallah, and then we'll and then I can continue on with the presentation. So I'll review one thing just before. This is something that we did last time, just to get us back into the flow, and then we can take questions. So can we take? So last time, we talked about the usage of an inhaler. That if somebody needs to use an inhaler, or or any other type of medication for that matter, during the fast, it occurs to them that they have to use some type of medication. Maybe it was unplanned. Somebody's having an asthma attack. Somebody is trying to bear very difficult, extremely painful migraines or something like that. They have to take some type of ibuprofen or paracetamol or something that's going to lessen the pain because it's too much to bear, and it's not helping to maybe sit down or to rest, and so on and so forth, to get to distract your mind or anything. And none of those things, nothing's really working to make it better. The only thing that's going to make it better is if you take some medicine or something like that. It would be acceptable in that case to take some medicine and thereby break your fast. And then once you've done that, then you just have to make up this fast. So you make up this fast after the month of Ramadan. Similarly, in beginning the fast, in determining whether you have to actually fast or not, there's two key things which we'd be looking for to determine, in order to determine whether or not you can actually fast. The first of those, which is outside of what you see on the screen, we have a first general consideration, which is general inability, that somebody is simply not able to fast because of great weakness. Right, so it might be somebody who's in old age or something like that, and fasting is very, very difficult for them. So that's an example of general inability. And then we have considerations which would apply to a bit more generally, which is that if there's going to be a worsening of the sickness, i.e., in the sense that somebody has to take medicine on a regular basis and they aren't able to rearrange and reschedule the medicine so that they take it before the fasting hours and after the fasting hours. So there would be a harm in that, whereby the sickness would increase. Then this would be an excuse, if they're unable to do anything about it, whereby they wouldn't be required to fast. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, so this would be a sick person who فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ, who is to make up days after the month of Ramadan. Similarly, if there's a delay in the recovery, if there's some type of delay, that so the sickness won't worsen um, if you spread out the medicine, but instead of recovering um, in a week, it might mean that you're recovering in about 2 or 3 weeks, right? So something like that. Of course, all of these things, if it doesn't entail too much harm, then there's great benefit in a little sacrifice, in a little striving for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, putting up with the little bit of difficulty for Allah's sake. However, if there is a possibility, and these types of things, they all depend on the nature of the sickness, right? The nature of the illness. So not every two things are obviously the same, and nor are every two people. So these are some considerations to keep in mind when it comes to sick people. So if anybody has any questions, then you're welcome to ask regarding this point or anything to do with fasting. Inshallah ta'ala, you can ask them. You can ask your questions at any time. Similarly, we covered, so this is just a brief overview of a couple of the points before we continue. This is the second point we covered last time, which is that do injections break the fast? And the answer is no, they don't. And the reason for that was that what we're looking for in terms of the fast becoming invalidated or nullified is the entry of a discernible substance into a cavity through an orifice of consequence into a cavity of consequence. So given the fact that an injection is a mere puncture through the skin and into the bloodstream or something like that, then this is not an orifice of consequence, so it doesn't invalidate the fast. So this means that somebody who needs to take a glucose injection or something, or needs to have an IV for some reason because they're severely hydrated, and they've been entered into A&E, and they've given them an IV rather than please drink these 3 or 4 liters of water. So they've given them that it wouldn't affect their fast. Similarly, a meningitis jab or any other standard vaccination or something like that, those things, they don't affect the validity of the fast. So now there's the issue of travel, which is sometimes the issue that people this is so in the Quran, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ. So this is أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. Then you can make up days, other days. And so أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ. So this means that you have to be traveling, right? When it's you can't. So if we take an example of a person in a city at Fajr time, if this is their circumstance, that they are in the city, then we know that one of the conditions for the obligation of the fast upon any individual is residency. So if you're in your city, whilst you're in your city, you're not considered to be a traveler. You're not considered to be a traveler. And if that, given that's the case, if the fasting day begins, then you are obligated to travel, even if you are traveling later that day. So it might be that you're traveling later on. Maybe you're traveling 10 o'clock in the morning, and Fajr is at 3 o'clock in the morning. So now, if this happens, you're still in your city because you're only leaving for the airport at 6 a.m. Then you would you would need to fast this day. Why? Because all of the conditions are applicable to you in your circumstance. At this point, you are not a traveler, right? So you are not a traveler. However, if we take the example of somebody who is outside of their city, so they are outside of the city when Fajr time enters. Once you're outside your city, you're considered to be a traveler, even if you, as long as you're intending to go a travel distance, then even if you haven't yet reached the travel distance, you're considered to be a traveler. Right, so you've left your city, you're considered to be a traveler. This is why, even if you're only a few minutes outside of your home city, you can begin shortening your prayers, right? Because at this point, the sacred law, the Sharia, considers you to be a traveler. So now, if Fajr time enters and you are in this state, you are no longer a resident. So this condition is now missing. If that's the case, this means that somebody is now that this person now has the option of fasting or not fasting. Of course, in situations where somebody is reasonably able to fast, such as in many of the circumstances which we find ourselves in modern travel, with in relative comfort, well fed, and so on and so forth. At least before we travel, then the basis is that it would be proper to fast, that it would be recommended to fast. However, if that's not the case, then somebody can postpone the fast, and particularly when there will be some type of difficulty entailed in fasting, such as if somebody is flying westwards, and maybe they have a night flight or something like that, or an evening flight just before the fasting, just before the fast end, just before Maghrib time. But given the direction of travel and the speed of travel, they don't actually hit Maghrib, right? So they actually they don't hit Maghrib for an extended period of time. So something like that perhaps would be an exceptional circumstance, where somebody, it would be difficult for them. But now we're talking about somebody who is outside their city at Fajr time, and then at that moment they decided that they were not going to fast. This if you're fasting now and you've begun your travel, then it's not acceptable to change your mind. You cannot break your fast just because of travel. So rather, once you begin your fast, even if you later become a traveler, there's no permission to break your fast. So of course, if there's overwhelming difficulty, somebody falls sick, and so on and so forth, then you're not breaking your fast now because you're a traveler. You're breaking your fast because you are now a sick person. Of course, if there's so this is the general rule. So there's a couple of questions now. So Majidullah says, does drawing blood break the fast? So giving blood, or so if somebody was to give blood to a blood bank or something like that, this doesn't break the fast. The reason for this is because what we are looking for is the entry of a discernible substance into discernible substance. So in this case, would be talking about, because there's nothing going in, rather you're giving blood, so blood is coming out. So the exiting of things from your body doesn't break your fast, except in the case of something like vomit, right? That's an exceptional case, but otherwise things coming out of your body, this is conceptually, it's like a wound, and blood is coming out. So even though the blood is being extracted, what we can say is that there's a discernible substance, which is the needle, which is entering into your body, but it's not entering through an orifice of consequence. An orifice of consequence is going to be places in the body that the Sharia recognizes as entry points into the digestive tract. and those are the mouth, nose, and the rear private part for the most part. This is generally speaking. So now it's just entering through your arm. So this is one reason for why it's not going to affect your fast. Secondly, it's not reaching a cavity of consequence. Rather, it's in your arm. It's not reaching your digestive system. So that's another reason why it doesn't affect your fast. Thirdly, and we didn't mention this because it's a bit of a nuance, but one of the conditions is also that the thing which enters the body needs to have independent stay within the body. So it needs to remain independently unconnected and completely disconnected to something outside of the body and the body cavity for your fast to be invalidated. So these would be three reasons for why giving blood doesn't break your fast. Is essentially what we're looking for is a person to eat or drink something. So if you're not eating or drinking anything and you're not getting anything into your digestive system, then there's nothing to worry about. Of course, there's a secondary issue, which is that is it permissible to give blood whilst you're fasting? And the answer to that would be it. It probably depends. And I say probably depends because people are different. People have different levels of strength. People's capacity for weakening differs. And generally speaking, the ulama said that doing something whereby you may put your fast at risk, i.e., in the sense that if you do this thing, you may have to break your fast because of weakness and illness or anything that comes about because of this particular activity which you partook in, then it will be offensive, reprehensible, makruh, to engage in that activity. And optimally, in order to avoid any doubtful situations where it may happen and you weren't expecting it, the ulama recommend doing so after Maghrib time, right? So doing it at night, um, right before iftar or something like that. Perhaps that would be acceptable. Allahu alam. So inshallah that answers your question. Another question is so Majdullah says, how is my city defined? So the city is defined. Usually, it's going to be defined customarily. So whatever is customarily known to be London is London. Whatever is customarily considered to be Cairo is Cairo. Um, so, uh, so in this particular place, are you in the city or its outskirts, or are you not in the city and its outskirts? Are you outside of the city? So this most people conventionally they know this when they're in the city or they're outside the city. A place where perhaps sometimes people might get confused is if the airport is also in the city. So if you head out to the airport and then you take off, it's not sufficient that you're still considered to be in your city until you've left the city airspace. Right? So once you've left the airspace, then you're outside of your city. The fuqaha, the jurists of old, the ancient jurists, they had specific definitions for what a city was. It's kind of best discussed in a specific classroom setting on a topic like that. As far as what most important thing for most of us is just to know that uh, that this place I'm in, is it still is this still New York or is it not? This is the question. And so is this New York City or is it not New York City? And if you've left New York City now if you've left your city. So this is how you define a city, generally speaking. So inshallah that answers the question. Um, so there's a question by Sidra who says, how do we calculate zakat on saving accounts? On saving accounts, RRSP and RESPs and TFSAs. Should we pay zakat on the amount we have access to, or should we pay zakat on the profits realized in a savings account over the last year? Our investments in a savings account meant for long-term investing subject to zakat on the full balance of the account. So this is a bit specific. The question's a bit specific because off the top of my head, I'm not sure for these specific types of savings accounts that you're referring to. I'm not familiar with them, so I don't know the details. Generally speaking, then so maybe yeah, you can consider sending this question in to us, and then we can take a look at it for you, inshallah, because maybe that's the best way to deal with it. But generally speaking, the wealth which is of consideration when it so this is the zakat, it's not fasting, but wealth which is of consideration, but it's kind of fasting because people tend to pay their zakat in the month of Ramadan, that you would include all money which is which you own into your assets, right? And then you would take away any liabilities, and whatever is left after that, you do approximately 2.5% of that. But given the specific nature of your question, I'd recommend that you just send it in to us so we can look at it for you, or give you a proper, more complete answer, inshallah. Okay. So now another example. So these are just some common questions. So somebody says that they're a smoker and do cigarettes break the fast? So if again we keep talking about these these principles, and the reason why we keep talking about them, because these are key. That if you understand the what these principles are saying, what they mean, then most questions will become quite straightforward, right? Quite straightforward. So now, so cigarette smoke, is it a discernible substance? So you can think about that. You can answer it. Is it going through an orifice of consequence? So where do people put the cigarette? So that's considered to be an orifice of consequence. Is it entering into a cavity of consequence and without excuse? Right. So a cavity of consequence is the digestive system. It starts at the throat. And is there any excuse for it? So if somebody just has a habit, then this is, and they're not thinking about the fast or something like that, this would be excusable. Just like anybody else who eats or drinks or does something which would normally invalidate the fast, and they do so in a state of forgetfulness, they're not conscious of the fact that they're fasting, then it doesn't affect their fast. But otherwise, if somebody does so consciously, accidentally, or deliberately, whatever, however that may be, I'm not sure how you can conceive of accidentally smoking, and then this will break the fast. Similarly, if we take an example of somebody who says, I once deliberately ate a banana during the fast. So how do I fix this? The thing to remember about deliberately doing something is that you can deliberately do something whilst being in a state of forgetfulness. And so you can deliberately do something. So when you forget the fact that you're fasting, then your actions, for the most part, are going to be deliberate. You deliberately are going to drink the water. You're deliberately going to eat something. You're deliberately going to engage in something you wouldn't otherwise engage in because of the fact that you're fasting. Similarly, you can forgetfully accidentally do something. So how so? You forget that you're fasting, and then you're gargling water, which is generally offensive, wrong to do whilst you're fasting. but you're doing it to ensure that the water of wudu reaches the back of your throat, and then you accidentally swallowed some of it. But at the time, you weren't conscious of the fact that you were fasting. And so you weren't conscious of the fact that you were fasting. So what is forgetfulness then? Forgetfulness is not being conscious of the fact that you, that's a typo, are fasting, and not that you are fasting. Inshallah. But if we look at it from a different angle, then what we could also say is that doing something deliberately is, it now depends on what exactly you did. So it could have been that you deliberately ate some type of food, which is what happened in this case, or it could have been a deliberate consumption of something which is not food, like a piece of grass or piece of paper or something like that. So now, in the first case where it was food, and in this case it was banana, then what would be required after deliberately having that banana or deliberately eating that samosa or that baklava or whatever the thing may be, then this would require a makeup and an expiation. Right? Requires a makeup and an expiation. If it's something other than that, it's other than food and drink, what we normally consider to be food and drink, and it's not something that the person usually partakes in. So it's not something that somebody has a habit of eating paper or something. Their ruling would be different to somebody who, just as a one-off, somebody told them that the paper tastes like biryani, so they decided to taste some of the paper and they accidentally swallowed it. Right, so so this would require a makeup, and actually I said accidentally, so they just decided to deliberately, they said, well, this is not food, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us not to eat, so this isn't technically eating, this is a piece of paper, so they eat the piece of paper deliberately. So in this case, they would be required to perform a makeup fast. However, in the former case, in the case of something else, it requires a makeup and an expiation. Right? It requires an expiation. Um, what is the expiation? Well, the expiation, the most common form of expiation, is to fast 60 consecutive days. And the condition is that those days do not contain the days of Eid, nor the 3 days after Eid al-Adha. So it's so if you start at the beginning of a lunar month, you started on the 1st of Muharram or something like that, and then you can just fast 2 complete lunar months. However, if you start in the middle of a month, other than the first of the month, then you'd have to fast 60 days. So if you start from the beginning of the month, then it's possible that you would fast 58 days, could be 59 days, and it could be 60 days. Right? Depends on how many days are in Muharram and how many days are in Safar in the month which comes after Muharram. Similarly, you cannot omit any day of fasting for any reason whatsoever. Right? So if there's even if there's an excuse for it, you're not sinful. Of course, if there's an excuse for omitting the fast for some reason. However, if that happens, you'd have to start again from the first day. Similarly, well, the exception to this would be if there's a lady who's menstruating, or something like that, and then of course, as long as she fasts up to the point at which she begins menstruating and continues fasting after she ends, of course, not on the day itself, i.e., the next day, because you cannot fast on that day. There's no such thing. She isn't required to do anything contrary to in the month of Ramadan. In the month of Ramadan, if her menstruation ends during the fasting hours, then she would imitate a fasting person, because we said before that there's two duties in the month of Ramadan. You either actually fast, or you pretend like you're fasting. Right? So imitating the fasting person is pretending like you're fasting. Outside of the month of Ramadan, she isn't required to do this, even if she is trying to perform her expiation, for example. So this is the expiation. Of course, it's only applicable in a select number of circumstances where somebody has definitely done something wrong, and the way to determine that it shouldn't be self-determined. Rather, there are many considerations, many things to look at. So, if somebody if somebody thinks that it's possible that it might be due from them, then they should consult a reliable scholar to ensure that that is actually the case, lest one puts oneself in difficult circumstances, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't require you to do so. Right? لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. And so just a reminder once again that if you have any questions, then you're welcome to ask them at any point. Another question is, well, I didn't used to fast when I was younger. So somebody became baligh at 13. However, they didn't really used to fast, or they used to fast sometimes without excuse. So there wasn't an excuse for it, because if there's an excuse for it, then that would be different. Or maybe 13, 14, 15, they didn't really used to fast, and then at 16 they became a bit more religious, and then they realized that they're supposed to be fasting in the month of Ramadan. So they began fasting. So there's a few years before that where they didn't fast. So do I have to expiate? Well, the answer is no, you don't, because one of the conditions for the obligation of the expiation, which is to fast 60 consecutive days, is that you are actually fasting the day you deliberately vitiated or deliberately nullified your fast. Right? So you have to have been fasting on that day. So if you weren't fasting on that day, you weren't actually fasting, and you were eating and drinking, having lunch, having a coffee, having breakfast, and so on and so forth, then so you weren't fasting. So the only thing which is due from you is a qada, a makeup. So whenever we talk about makeups and expiations, they are two separate duties. Right? So you have to perform the makeup, but you also have to do an expiation. So technically, it's 61 days, right? If you start from anything other than the beginning of a month, that you have to do the qada separately and then the expiation separately. There's also a hadith here related by Imam Tirmidhi, where the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, "Man aftara yawman min Ramadan min ghayri rukhsatin wala maradin lam yaqdi anhu sawmu ad-dahri kullihi wa in samahu." So it says that whosoever breaks, whosoever doesn't fast in the month of Ramadan, aftara yawman, without excuse, and without any form of sickness, then he won't be able to make it up. An entire year's worth of fasting won't be able to make it up, even if you fasted that amount. So, however, the ulama explained to us that, of course, if you fast one day in its stead, then you would have made up that fast from a legal perspective. But this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us about the reward which a person would have missed out on. That the reward of the month of Ramadan is absolutely tremendous. The reward of the month of Ramadan, reward of fasting in the month of Ramadan, is truly tremendous. And somebody who doesn't fast has missed out on khayrun kathir. They've missed out on tremendous good. And even if they fasted for the rest of their life, right, then they wouldn't be able to make up for that one missed day of fasting, in terms of what they missed out on the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with respect to that day of Ramadan. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Hadith al-Qudsi, "As-sawmu li," right? Fasting is mine, or fasting is for me. وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ, and I shall recompense for it. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He will give the recompense for the fast. And this is something tremendous. Only this statement was only said for the fast. It wasn't said for the prayer. It wasn't said for zakat. It wasn't said for the hajj. Rather, there's a special secret in the fasting, and in fasting the month of Ramadan, whereby a connection is made between the servant and his Lord, if he strives to build that relationship and that connection. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. At the end of the verses of fasting in Surah Al-Baqarah, and if my servants ask you about me, فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ, and then say to them that I am extremely I am near, right? وهو أقرب إليهم من حبل الوريد, and he is closer to you than your jugular vein. How so? That your very existence, that you are being sustained at every single moment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in directly. And so he's keeping you in existence at one moment to the next, that you are being sustained in existence by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now we also come to another issue which can be confusing, but it's inshallah it won't be in about a minute from now. So does vomiting break the fast? So this has a little bit of detail. There's about two things just to keep in consideration, to keep in mind. So if you're vomiting, then the vomiting is either going to be induced, or it's random or spontaneous. So if it was induced, somebody induced vomit, and it was a mouthful. So the condition is that it be a mouthful. So it was induced and it was a mouthful, then this would break the fast. Similarly, if it was random or spontaneous and it was a mouthful, then it doesn't break the fast unless it was deliberately swallowed. And if it was deliberately swallowed, then even if it's only a small amount of it, and then this would break your fast. And in both of these cases, there's only a makeup which is due. There's only a makeup which is due. There's no expiation or anything like that. Rather, the fast is invalidated, and you just have to make up the fast at some point after the month of Ramadan. Of course, whenever your fast is invalidated, you still have to do the other duty. So we talked about the two duties of the fasting person. You either fast in the month of Ramadan, you imitate or pretend like you're fasting. So you have to pretend like you're fasting, and for the rest of the day, unless of course somebody is required to take medicine because they've fallen ill or something like that. But otherwise, if somebody, even 10 seconds after the adhan of fajr, they gargled some water and it went down accidentally, they'd still have to pretend like they're fasting for the rest of the day, right? So they have to actually fast for the rest of the day. They can't just simply have breakfast now and have lunch and have an afternoon cup of tea or coffee, and have an early dinner and get an early night. Rather, that's none of that is considered to be acceptable. So this is the end of the things which are some of the common questions of the month of Ramadan. So if there are any other questions, we have about a minute now, so we'll probably take one question, or less than a minute now. But if there aren't any further questions today, then we'll pause here and we'll continue in the upcoming session, where of course it's a live Q&A. So bring your questions and then you can ask those questions, inshallah ta'ala, in the next session. So we'll stop here. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.